All right, thank you, everyone. Welcome to the penultimate session. I love that word, of the MarkLogic World event. Only one more thing left after this, the fireside chat. Happy to welcome you to a fantastic panel led by our own Adrian Carr on moving to the cloud. And with that, turn it over to Adrian. There will be plenty of time for questions throughout. Please wait till the mic gets to you. I'll be running around. I get my exercise that way, so, humor me, please. Thanks.
Testing. Hi, afternoon. So we're the last thing before the last thing, so put that in context. How long do you think it's going to be before you go to an IT conference and the word cloud isn't somewhere on the agenda? It might be a few years yet. So we're going to have a panel conversation in a moment, very informal. But before we start, just a show of hands, okay? Think back 2 years. 2 years. And a show of hands, whose companies were committed to the cloud at that time? So just show of hands. So hold your hands up, and then add to that anyone who's moved to the cloud since then. A few more. So then if you're in the cloud, put your hand up. If it's a public cloud, let's have your palm open. And if it's a private cloud, let's just have the fist. So we get a view on what we've got. So, or both. Just go the whole way. You can. Okay. So we've got a whole mixture of people here, and what we're seeing out in the marketplace is there's still a lot of change, a lot of. Did anyone sit through the Al's presentation, Microsoft Azure? Yeah, fantastic. So the percentage of companies that are embracing the cloud from no slides is kind of huge, whereas what we see in the room is still quite a number of companies holding back. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have a panel conversation. I'm going to introduce our speakers, allow them a little bit of time to explain who they are and what their experience is and what gives them the right to sit on this chair and to address us. Going to go through a number of questions and then pass out the microphone. So if you've got ideas or thoughts or questions, we're going to pass out the microphone to take those. We are recording it, so please, when you're asking the questions, wait for the microphone, and then we should be all done in time to move to the main room. So with that, I'd like to introduce Michael, Jeff, and Serge. Michael, Jeff, and Serge in that order. And having turned it on, Michael, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
My name is Michael Henry. I'm a partner with KPMG in New York. And we're a professional services company, so we get to see lots of clients, and we advise them on their cloud strategies. And so I'm fortunate to see companies that are completely running away from the cloud, and companies that have fully embraced the cloud, and why.
My name is Jeff Sider. I work for Reed Elsevier, is our parent company. I work for our legal and professional group, LexisNexis. We're a provider of legal information for lawyers and law firms, and also other information, news, patent data. We started out on-prem, and we have since moved to the cloud. So I guess that's why I'm here, because we actually did move to the cloud.
I am Serge Coll. I am the technical lead architect for a asset inventory system for Morgan Stanley. And we deployed MarkLogic on a private cloud, and from what I know is the first database to be in Morgan Stanley on a private cloud. So.
Very good. So if I can just go back to Jeff for a second. So Jeff, you're going to the public cloud. Are you all the way there?
No, we're not. We started in around 2013, moving to the cloud, and we have essentially 7 clusters of data. We have quite a lot of data, and we moved one of those clusters in 2016, and we had another big release just a month ago, and that was another 2 clusters. So we have 4 more to go. And so right now we're actually running hybrid. We're running across the cloud and on-prem. Our MarkLogic is split between the two environments currently.
Okay. And you know, we mentioned earlier, I'm sure you don't mind us saying that outside the kind of intelligence space, you know, Lexis is one of our largest, if not the largest commercial installation. So that's a big journey you're on. So, okay, back to Michael. So in Gary's opening keynote on God, what day was that? Tuesday? All that way back yesterday. Cool. We talked a bit about cloud neutrality, and you know, personally, I spent about 11 years at EDS selling outsourcing, which was all meant to be neutral, but was really a lock-in. And Gary talked about the story there. So, really, for the panelists, how much have you considered neutrality of the cloud? What have you done to avoid lock-in, or have you kind of just accepted that that's fate and it's something you're going to live with?
Well, I think for if you attended my presentation this morning, we also deployed MarkLogic in the cloud. Our client deployed it in the cloud, the public cloud, and it is their only cloud service that they use. And my advice to my clients is that you should have a mix of providers, and you should architect your services so that you can move from one to the other to avoid exactly the kind of lock-in problem we're talking about. However, I believe that as time goes forward, I think we'll see that there will be more standardized offerings and migration will become easier, and the problem, in some sense, will solve itself. But for the moment, I recommend everyone should have more than one cloud provider.
I might be a different voice in this conversation. For our, when we looked at the cloud, you know, when we started 2013, obviously cloud providers in the public space have come a long way, as many of you probably know. We surveyed sort of the field at the time of the big hitters, and you know, we chose a public cloud, one of the public cloud providers. And as far as lock-in, we're not too concerned about that at this time. Time to market and providing, you know, capabilities that are not core to our business. You know, if we can get them from a cloud provider and get out to the market faster, that's okay with us. And I like you were saying, I believe that over time this problem will be solved. So it's not something that we're concerned about this time. So we're not looking to, you know, build installation layers or those kind of things. If the cloud provider provides some key capability that's not core to our business, we're going to use it and move on.
So as I mentioned, we're on a private cloud, which I believe the technology Morgan will be actually releasing open source. And it's on over the same technology as Docker, with the differences that you can actually go steal resources from physical servers used by other systems. So you can say this part of the server, if it's idle, the cloud would grab it, 50% of it, so to leave some room, and then things like that. They're also working on making a layer that, because we're on the private cloud, and we actually believe that the public cloud is good for elasticity, but it's not always cheaper. But if you have an interface that you deploy, you say deploy, you have capacity within your plant, it goes on your plant, you don't, it automatically goes to a provider, and neutrality this way. As I mentioned, I believe we're going to be releasing this technology, and there's another open source software over Docker, I believe that's an initiative that started the same thing.
So Serge, just holding on for a moment. So in effect, your business has chosen, you know, what is today's incarnation of outsourcing. You've picked a provider who's building a cloud environment or an outsourced environment specifically for you.
Actually, no, we're building it in-house.
Okay.
And I would like to say it was insight. We were smarter than everyone else. It's not. The cloud was cheap. Cloud became more expensive than when it came out. The regulatories made our decision easy. We have some data that we just can't put on the cloud, so we had to find a private answer.
Okay, so that makes sense. And then for Jeff, I mean, the point Gary makes is that it's a natural business phenomenon for these open cloud providers to start building proprietary technology which you become to rely on. in the same way that some open source and things like Hadoop now is less portable than it was ever envisaged to be. But it sounds like you've made a strategic decision to pick a provider and to make the most of all the things that they put in their stack, not with a view of how do I get out of this if it fails or gets expensive, so much as we're committed to it, we're going to work with
Right. There's a time in the market, right? So if we can pick a serverless architecture, or we can use something that the cloud provider provides and get something out there quicker, rather than going through architecting ourselves or put an installation layer in or whatever, that's what we're going to do. We definitely monitor health of the providers. And I totally agree with Serge. I mean, cloud, you don't go to cloud because of cheapness, right? It's not necessarily a cheaper solution. You go there for the elasticity and for the agility that it gives your company, versus the time it takes. In our old on-prem environment, it'll take us months to get servers, or even get the latest gen of servers, or change environments, because cabling and all those kind of things put on the floor. With the cloud, we can experiment different configurations much easier. Those are the reasons you go. If you're going there for a cost reason, I think you really need to examine that, because I totally agree, it's not always going to be cheaper.
So Jeff, staying with you, and then I'll go to Michael, because it's a segue to the return on investment. There's a big, it's not necessarily cheaper. When back in the 80s, 90s, I was selling outsourcing, we weren't necessarily going to be cheaper, not least because we were going to make a margin on a service that didn't have a margin or profitability to start with. However, you can scale you don't have to build your architecture to your peaks.
Exactly.
And especially in your business.
Exactly, right. I mean, if you look at the way we would normally scale our infrastructure out, I mean, we have a whole, monitoring team, projecting 6 months, a year out, trying to figure out, we need to get this hardware on the floor, we need to expand it this way, our customer growth is at this trajectory. And, when you're doing those things, as you mentioned, right, I mean, you're putting, a much larger machine, and you're only using about half, 50%, because you're projecting that peak. In the cloud, we're able to scale that down, right, and you're trying to hit pretty much at the, the optimal run rate, and with the idea that obviously you can scale up quickly to meet the demand, and then obviously you can shut things off. I think like I said, the other key thing is for us, and that we have seen on getting our return on investment back, is being able to experiment. Right. I mean, even on our first initial MarkLogic, we sized what we were going to put in the cloud based upon what was on-prem. That's what we tested. But when we finally got to the cloud, we were able to spin up other, play with the mixes of different machine sizes, different memory, different disk, and try these things out. And then if it failed, it was okay. We could throw it all away. We didn't have to invest millions of dollars in hardware, and this has to work. And what we eventually went out on in the cloud was very different than what we had started with. So that agility is just, you can't match that in your own data centers, at least in my opinion.
Yeah. So let's bring it back to Michael. So in building your service, you've had to virtually scale from scratch in recent times. So what kind of considerations did you go through in setting up the infrastructure?
Well, as I mentioned this morning, some of the information that we handle has a lot of personally identifiable information and could be quite a liability to the banks involved, to the Know Your Customer documentation. In fact, depending on the jurisdiction, the data actually don't belong to the bank. They belong to the bank's clients, which presents an additional exposure. So in our initial releases, we deployed on KPMG infrastructure because we handle this kind of information for our clients all the time. We do audits, we do tax preparation and things like that. So we handle very sensitive information. We have a very conservative infrastructure. And when we went to this larger bank, we had the discussion that, well, we were just, I hear what these guys are saying and I agree, we as KPMG are never going to be a large-scale cloud provider for our clients. So as soon as we got to scale, we were very happy. Our choice was either the bank could deploy on premises or the bank could deploy in the cloud. And in this case, the bank and their regulator had approved cloud deployment. They had things in the cloud already. It was we were very happy to be working with MarkLogic on this one because we leveraged your professional services group in terms of how to deploy into the cloud. I would add one more thing when we talk about agility and scalability. I think in our case, it's also a question of skills. And I think there's a natural concentration of the skills in running world-class data centers and networks and high availability and failover that is going to be concentrated in these cloud providers that very few organizations are going to be able to match. I've done a lot of stock exchange work. That's an area where they have a lot of those skills. And I'm sure the larger banks would have this. I think for many companies, you're just never going to have the experts in security and availability and all these other things that the cloud providers have, and you can leverage that as well.
Okay. Serge, any other components that contribute to an ROI? What was the driving force within the bank?
Me, it was 99.999 uptime, which is very hard with a physical server. But with a cloud, the container goes down, it moves, it comes back, and things like that. Now, I had an extra challenge that my cloud actually doesn't support persistent disk. Well, that's not true. I could use a remote disk, but the speed, the I/O wasn't there, so we use local disk. But because of the replication of MarkLogic and the way that it works, MarkLogic takes care of MarkLogic is a distributed file system in a sense. If you actually do all your proper replicas and things like that, so it wasn't an issue.
Speaking of replicas, you've got different environments, so your system based on MarkLogic is live, but you're doing development. You'll spin up a final user acceptance test. You've got a DR site. Are all those different environments just taken care of and hidden? And is there an ROI about the fact you don't need all those environments all of the time?
Yes, there is an ROI, and it's the same thing that it's public or private. Is basically as I need a QA installation, I say, okay, I need this much RAM, this much things, push a button, 15 minutes later, I'm up with all my replicas and everything. And I can even push 2 buttons, and then I get the first one and what we call a replica cluster. Failover cluster, because since I don't have disk persistence, I'm paranoid, I have a second one. So it's easy to deploy, and you don't have to worry about hardware. Or the other thing is you want to do performance testing. Now you should be as close as possible as production. You don't want to keep, so you might kill your UAT and QA installation. Bring up a performance things. Takes 15 minutes to do it. You do all your performance tests. Once that's done, you brought it down and you bring back your 2 other environments. So it allows you to move much more freely.
Yeah, good. And Jeff, that must have been a big thing, the fact of the different environments not needing to maintain them for a long period of time.
Right, yeah. I mean, just like I said, the flexibility, right? I mean, for the size of the environments that we were maintaining, I mean, we were maintaining, we had our DR site and we had our disaster recovery site and our main site. They were mirrors of each other, and, those were just wasted cycles. We're waiting for that disaster. We're not leveraging them. When we went to the cloud and we deployed a different HA technology, HA architecture, and we're not just having idle cycles, right? So and then, like you said, the different environments, being able to bring them up and take them around, like Serge was talking about, is huge. Okay. So.
We actually didn't want to waste any cycles. So for the HA, what we did is we built a smart API with routing capabilities. So for ingesting, we go to the read-write cluster, and for real-time UIs, we go to the failover cluster. But the API is written in a way that if the read cluster disappears, it automatically, all application with obviously now you have reduced capacity, but we don't want to waste idle. We want to always take advantage of everything. So we tried to build a smart API for that.
Very good, thank you. So back to Michael. So changing to another topic, which is really security and data governance. I think one of the Wall Street banks, famously the chief exec not many years ago said, we will never, and has since U-turned. So, the reluctance quite some time ago. Michael, you mentioned the regulator who controls a huge amount of what happens in the banking sector, has said that this is now okay to move to the cloud. What are the issues around today and separating the reality versus the perception around security and data governance that you've got to take in?
Well, first I would say that the regulators are rarely leading practitioners.
Right. Yeah.
And it usually takes a while for the regulation to catch up. So even in
a nice way, obviously we mean that in a nice way.
Any regulators in the audience, thank you. You've made it possible for me to educate my children. So with our deployment for this bank, while we are using a public cloud, the restrictions on geography still apply.
Yep.
So the bank has to demonstrate, and the cloud provider has to demonstrate to the regulator in question that the appropriate data remain in country. And the United States is very liberal in this regard. You can keep data anywhere as long as you have a copy here in the United States that they have access to. But there are many countries in the world where Europe has their own special privacy laws. Many countries, you cannot have certain data leave the country. So the cloud providers, they know this. And so they're also lobbying the regulators because this is a key part of their business. And in this case, they show, yeah, we can deploy anywhere that the bank wants to use the platform. We can deploy in that country and the data remain in that country.
Okay, good.
Yeah, totally. What Michael's saying, I mean, totally agree. I mean, we've seen it from our industry. We've seen a shift. I mean, when we first started talking with lawyers, they're very paranoid about, to Michael's point, that the data leaving their premises with the cloud. Cloud's not safe. With all the change, we see a change in attitude, a little more acceptance to the cloud being quote safe. However, just exactly what Michael was saying. I mean, we have user data that we actually store on behalf of our users, and for our deployments in overseas in Europe, they can't leave the country, has to be there, and the cloud is going to allow us to deploy there versus putting out yet another data center or not having that feature or that capability for those customers, and we can put out a data center there and keep the data in the country. So totally see the same things that Michael was talking about as well.
I don't have much to add on that, except that we face the same thing. In fact, it's even more complicated. Sometimes the data can go anywhere in the world from one country, except that country. So you have those kinds of rules, or even the user interface. It's like really is, you call someone on support, it cannot be someone in that country. So.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to, we've talked a little around decision to move to the cloud and some of the considerations, governance, security. I'm kind of going to move a little bit into the progress to the cloud. What's been learnt, what ideas or thoughts would you share, and then talk about change management, and then we'll open up for questions. So first thing then, Serge, starting there, practical considerations really. What practical things have you learned from this change? Things that maybe you didn't necessarily see beforehand, but now you look, and I mean, you mentioned some already. There's some stuff you just don't have to worry about anymore.
Actually, not to sound arrogant, I didn't really learn anything. What it did do, though, it forces you to do best practice. Because if you think about it, when a physical server breaks, you move it, is because it happens more rarely, you actually didn't put all those safeguards, but then you have an outage of 4 hours or 5 hours while you bring. The cloud is, you have to assume that container is going to move. But if you actually did those best practice, which you did learn in the physical server world, but just said, it's going to happen maybe in 2 years, I won't bother. You're forced to do it, so it's easier to tell your manager, now you have to do the resiliency and not assume that it's going to be up and things like that. So as a technologist, we already knew, but I think now your managers and the budget understand that it's required. You have to put all that resiliency in place, but I think everyone learned in university is you don't put your backup in one place because then a plane could actually crash in it. That's what I saw, and has nothing to do with 2001. I knew that way before. I've been in university a long time ago.
And Serge, just staying with you for a second. So in effect, the same people who were providing your internal IT service before are providing it now, but the way they provide it as an infrastructure as a service or platform as a service has changed.
No, I'm talking about the application itself, because the cloud actually tells you here it is, but if you actually don't build your application to be resilient, switch IPs, use those discovery IP, or what I said, the smart API, your application won't do it. Now actually take the cloud completely away, do those APIs, do those things over physical server, now you move this physical server to this physical server. Everything I said would work in a physical server environment as well. It's just we're lazy. That's basically, we played the statistics game, but that's why on the cloud, I said earlier we moved to the cloud to 99.9 because of 999. You could actually make physical servers the same way if you actually applied all the same concepts. It's just harder sell to do.
That's interesting.
I completely agree with Serge. So as I mentioned, I worked in the the exchange industry for a while, where they've really mastered failover and high availability. And we used to make a joke at the Deutsche Börse: what do you do when one of the hosts fails? What do you do? And the answer is nothing. You just wait till the end of the day, and then you let the others take over. and you can implement those things, and companies have done that before. For us, you know, we had to really think about it. I loved what you guys were saying. Hey, we can just spin these servers up and we can spin them down. That's wonderful, and we can do that better now. But in the beginning, you know, I knew that, you know, Ryan was my guy, and if I needed a new instance of something, Ryan knew how to do it, and you know, it wasn't as automated as it should have been. And when you move to the cloud, Ryan's not there anymore. So you have to have kind of industrial strength deployment and a configuration that are robust so that it can be automated. And for us, that was something we had to do when we moved into the cloud, which we hadn't done before.
That's good. So Jeff, you were already you've gone with a public cloud provider, so they are, by kind of definition, as it turns out, market leader and a best practice. So, what did you learn practically about that change?
Well, we had a lot of the same things Michael was talking about. I mean, we had been in our data center, and our data center had been, you know, a world-class data center, and we were, you know, 4 nines, and we had a lot of, you know, hardened practices and procedures, and, you know, exactly what Michael was saying. If I wanted a server up, I knew who to call, and I knew that person right there, or I knew that group, and it was very regimented, and our, you know, our tiers of support, you know, level 1, level 2, level 3, this is how it escalated, here's how tickets got routed, all this stuff, right? And when we started the cloud, it was like, oh, interesting. So we're going to the cloud, right? And you know, the IP addresses changed on these machines. Oh, really? Oh, okay. Or all our logging information is based upon host. Oh, yeah, okay. But the host, oh, yeah. All right, very interesting. So, I mean, so just we had to learn a lot. I mean, we you know, had to basically come up with what our operating model was going to be and how were we going to manage this, and really, like Michael was talking about, you know, infrastructure as code, automated deployments. We set the stage right out of the bat. You know, no console. No changes to console. Any change has to go back to, you know, CloudFormation templates and everything else, and that's just the way it's going to be. And you know, security best practices. You know, how are we going to secure these things? We had to sort of reinvent the way we had done things, and we had this. I'm sure this is people have probably heard this before, but I mean, we to drive that into our company, into our fabric, we said, okay, so. And this sort of resonated, this might resonate with some of you, I don't know, but for the way we used to view our data center, right, and our machines and everything, we called them pets, right? We care for them, we give them names, they get sick, we fix them, right? We put new parts in them. That's why our data center and our host and everything used to be called. They're our pets. We're moving to the cloud. When we go to the cloud, it's cattle. If there's a problem, we shoot it and move on. So that was how we taught, and that's what in every meeting, for many meetings, we had to keep saying, they're not pets. We don't know, they're not pets. We're just shooting them and moving on, and had to instill that thought about the resilience that the Serge was talking about. You know, it just goes on and move on. So we had quite a ways to go, and a lot of procedures and practices, and cloud's kind of a double-edged sword too, right? In the fact that it's easy to start things up. Your developers can spin things up, but on the other hand, that's you know, a hindrance, right? Because ensuring that they're not wide open to the world, right, and they're not leaking information, you know, that's hard to keep control of. So you know, keeping tabs on everything that people can spin up very easily. For in the past, I had to call, you know, Michael, right, and Ryan, had to call that guy, right, and if he wasn't there, I didn't get that machine, right, and I had to wait. So
staying with Jeff for a second, the size of the clusters you're moving across has meant that this is a long project. Has the service level or the technology basis of your cloud provider evolved during that time, and has that had an impact?
Yeah, huge impact. Actually, it's been a long journey. I mean, we started back in 2013. We're much like many businesses, right? In order to get that amount of commitment and funding behind some project, we have to do a business case, show, you know, how much it's going to cost, what's return on investment going to be, et cetera, right? So, you know, we spent months on this business case, and, you know, we were costing out the machines. We're going to how many do we need, what sizes we need, what's our storage going to be, what's our I/O rates, you know, going to be, and what's all the cost, you know. So we're down there figuring all this out, and, you know, we come up with a number, you know, and put it in the business case, and we get it approved, and that's all great. So we start the project, that's cool. And about, you know, 6 months in, they're going, what's the cost going to be? So we go back out, go through all the same rigmarole again, right? Well, everything's changed. Right? I mean, the cloud providers are moving faster than you know, right? I mean, you go out, there's new types of machines, they're different price. The price that you knew last month is different this price. There's new options. Holy crap, you know, now I can get, you know, the 64, you know, gig machine, 32, holy crap, you know, so maybe that's what I want, right? And so we go through the whole thing. We go through the whole thing again, size it all out, get another number, right? And, you know, we did that 3 or 4 times, right, before we finally got there. And, you know, one thing, you know, lesson learned there is, like, you know, don't put a whole lot of stock in what, you know, where you are today, because where you are today on the costing or whatever is going to be super different by the time you get to the end game, because you're going to choose different machines, different types, pricing is going to change and everything else. So.
Can I ask a question?
You can.
How did you get MarkLogic to work on?
Yeah, it was pretty cool. It's really tricky. You got to know the right person to ask. Yeah.
Call Ryan.
Yeah, Ryan. Yeah, that guy.
Yeah. Okay, very good. So changing final few questions, then we'll open to questions from the floor. Is about we've talked a lot about the technology, but what about the people? What about the kind of change management aspects about moving to the cloud? And just for each of you to talk a little bit about some of the ways your organization has changed, some of the challenges you may have met and how you overcame those challenges, and whether new people in your organization have emerged in roles that are now key that previously you didn't necessarily need or make use of.
Yeah, well, I'll start to have the mic. You know, one of the, for our business leaders, you know, the CapEx versus OpEx model, right? I mean, you know, so you used to, you know, buy the machine, depreciate it 5 years, et cetera, right? So it's a very different model in the cloud, right, with the OpEx. And we're still struggling with that from a financial perspective. That just seems to send them for a loop, how to deal with that. You know, and I think the other, so that's been an interesting challenge for our business side. From the technology side, it's really a case of, you know, even once you get there into the cloud and you get your stuff up and running, it seems to be working pretty good. You know, it's a continuous refactoring effort, right? I mean, all the time you have to look to see where your cost is. How can I bring that cost down? Oh, look, I can do this. I couldn't do that last month. I can do this month. So it's that whole continuous refactoring, that it's really a journey. It's not, not a sprint and I'm done and it's just running and I never have to touch it again, right? You have to constantly monitor it, and your developers have to develop a mindset of, how can I continually optimize this? What are ways that I can bring my costs down? I can use this type of storage now. I can use this, et cetera, and it'll decrease my cost by this much. So that's the other thing we've seen. A couple of things.
Serge.
So I'll take back what I said for the previous question. Is operationally we learned a lot. I'm more a developer. I think like a developer. But one of the challenges, a lot of people think it's black magic happening under the hoods, and sometimes you have to. The more influential people in the company, you have to convince them, yes, it's true. It's like you can't just, it's not there, it's now there, and now it's there. You need to adjust, but the ROI are worth it. So I would say the biggest challenge is actually people, not technology. Yeah. It's safe, it's good. In fact, I recommend, even if your manager is against the cloud, is you build your application in QA over the cloud. And if your QA instance doesn't go down, that's because you thought about all the edge condition of a crash, and your physical installation will just be better out of it.
So just research for a second. So you said the key issue is the people. Is that a reluctance to change? Is it a fear of the unknown? Is it a new set of skills that are required?
It's the same thing with MarkLogic probably deals with on the database side. It's been proven and true. Physical servers have been here since the dawn of time. Dinosaurs used them.
Yeah, that's true. Reluctance to change.
Adrian, I'm glad you mentioned the people question, because I think it's very important. First, I talked about one of my daughters this morning who hated banking and went to work for MTV. I have another daughter who works in IT security. And I talked to her about what she's doing. And a lot of what she's doing is IT security, specifically around the cloud infrastructure for the company she works with. And so they have multiple cloud vendors, and she works in that area, a job which didn't exist. No. When she left school, that job didn't exist. I think there's, in my opinion, gazing into my crystal ball, there's a direction to history on these things. And one of the things that I know Serge and I were arguing about when we were preparing for this, I can remember the days when it was really important for a large company to have network specialists, because you had to string together your own fiber optic networks and your T1 or T3, whatever cables were at the time, and you had to have a lot of these skills on board. And there's just a lot less demand for those skills, because for the most part, network has kind of disappeared and become a utility. I think that cloud infrastructure, for me, if I gaze into my crystal ball, it's a similar phenomenon. It's growing very quickly. I think we're going to see, if you had to map a percentage of data that are stored on-premise versus in cloud, that's going to go only in one direction. And so there's going to be an impact on people and skills. You're going to have more people managing the providers of cloud services, like my daughter, and fewer people who are actually managing data centers. I don't know anybody who wants to be long a lot of data centers right now.
Yeah. There's an interesting parallel with MarkLogic, and anyone who sat through the sessions the last couple of days, part of what we're trying to do is spend more time on the value add part of data than the plumbing. Yeah? Instead of manipulating and changing formats and loading, all the time loading and doing schemas, get the data in and then figure out how to add value. In the same way in the cloud, all the non-value add stuff of running a stable and secure network that will burst up and down as you require it, scaling, you don't need to be involved in that. You can spend the time figuring out what applications add value to you and your customers. So,
I think, in fact, if you actually extrapolate and there's more cloud providers and you use a layer that you can move, in fact, maybe you're in 2 clouds at one time, as long as you don't, not everyone decide to choose one provider, like this is the provider, or 2, because then they will actually have you, because then moving out is more expensive than you doing anything else. So now you don't stay because it's cheap. you stay because it's cheaper than moving off. So it's important to be, I think it's important to be neutral, or we give them the full power.
Very good. Okay, thank you. So let's, Alicia has a microphone. If you've got a question, please raise your hand. This is Alicia's Keep Fit bit. Yeah.
Thank you, Alicia. Got a lot of questions, one for, I guess, each person on the panel.
Start with Serge, he's got the mic.
Yeah.
Actually, Jeff, funny you should say that, because that was my question for you, is you mentioned that culturally with the people, there were a lot of changes that you had to do, and that was something I think even Serge alluded to, was, you know, a lot of people believed it was all voodoo and black magic. My biggest question is, how do you handle that sort of a cultural change? Like, any tips for people for handling that sort of a cultural change?
Yeah, it's just a consistent message, right? Sort of like what Serge was saying, right, from the top, and you know, getting buy-in. I mean, like, to your point, we had a lot of when we first started, you know, and obviously you'd expect this from certain factions of the company, like, you know, a lot of the data center operations people, et cetera. You know, they're like, so when's this going to fail? You know, I'm sure you guys are going to quit going down this path because this isn't going to work, right? I mean, come on, clouds, you know, you can't do that, right? And so, you know, just it's a consistent message, you know, and I think as time has passed, I mean, like I said, we started our whole journey in 2013-ish, and it took us, you know, a long while to get there, and the cloud providers and, you know, the media and et cetera. I mean, I think more people are probably a little more, you know, understanding, or, you know, have more faith in the cloud, et cetera. But the only thing I can say is, you know, the other part is showing, you know, seeing is believing, right? And when you see it out there and you see it, you know, being able to scale up, take it down, like sort of saying, hit a button and it's there, take a button off, right? That shows that you can demonstrate it and see it, and when people start seeing it, they start believing it.
And I apologize for monopolizing this, but I'm also interested in some of the security challenges that you might have had, specifically something that I'm seeing a lot on my job right now, because we're very new to the landscape, is dealing with the standard images and scanning, and, you know, I mean, just because it's out there doesn't mean the vulnerabilities don't exist. So I'm wondering if any of you have encountered that, and what, if anything, you might have done to handle some of those issues, because you have to get, like, authorization to scan every single time. So I'm just wondering.
That's me. No, so we have, so our security group, right, has procedures and practices that they've developed, and then, you know, we control the hardening of the images, et cetera, and they're in our, you know, our artifactory that they can choose from. So nobody can, you know, you can't just willy-nilly pick out an image and throw it out there, right? So we do have checks and balances along the way to make sure, you know, that things are, you know, secure and they're following our practices as best we can. So, you know, procedures and practices, they don't all go the way out of the way just because you're going to the cloud, right? So those are still, you know, that's how we deal with it.
Yeah, I've had the opportunity to visit the data centers of New York Stock Exchange and Shanghai Stock Exchange, Deutsche Börse, and these are people who really understand hardening security and failover and high availability. And those guys, they're always going to have requirements that are, I think, it's doubtful that Amazon Web Services is going to give them that level of security. For most of us, though, if it's not the case today, it will be in the future. The capability of the cloud providers in terms of security is going to be greater than what you can source internally. You won't have the scale, and you won't have the expertise to do what they can do. You may be in an industry or in a sector where your needs still outstrip what the cloud providers can provide, like a stock exchange. But in general, for most of us, you know, they will exceed our capabilities.
They'll just have best practice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's their business, right?
Very, very good question. Thank you.
All right, I think we can take one more. We've got 5 minutes left, so I know
Okay.
you had a closing bit.
If for those using a public cloud, how did you solve for certain regions like mainland China where they're behind a firewall? How did you solve any CDN issues?
I can talk about that one. The bank that we were working with, they had already worked with the cloud provider that they're using to assure the regulator that the data remain in country and were accessible to the regulator and were not shared where they were not supposed to be shared. And the cloud providers, they know these regulations and they all want to serve the banking industry. So I haven't looked at the tier 2 or tier 3 vendors, but certainly the tier 1 vendors, they understand if you want to have banking data available to a bank in Singapore, you better have a deployment in Singapore, and it's up to the cloud provider to prove to the MAS that your data stay there.
So we're coming to the end of the time, actually. I'm just kind of for fun, what I wanted was a quick fire. These are short, snappy answers. Do I need to say that again? No? Okay, so just for fun, and then we'll wrap up. And so what is the biggest misconception of the cloud, would you say? Start with Michael, and then...
My misconception that you could just push stuff into the cloud and you get all these benefits magically without having to make things automated and robust and all that stuff. That was a great learning for me.
Very good.
Cheap and infinite.
Didn't leave me any answers.
Not secure. Yeah, that's a misconception.
So we'll start with you next time, and you can leave us no answers.
Okay, next one then. So if there was a billboard promoting how your company uses the cloud, snappy slogan, what would it say?
Safe and slow.
Okay, good.
Got cloud?
Inevitable.
Inevitable, good, I like that. If you look back, if you were able to meet yourself before you started the journey into the cloud, and if you could kind of say something to that person, knowing what you know today, what would you say?
Stay away from the IT business.
Yeah, I second that, yeah.
It's a journey. It's not a sprint.
Take political courses because you'll need to be a politician.
That's good.
Okay, last one. And obviously there's no big prizes, theoretically, but there might be. What is your favorite conference to go to during the year?
Oracle.
Oh, yeah. We've done so well. We have done so well.
MarkLogic.
Oracle too.
Oh, it was going so well, wasn't it? Can we edit that bit out? Cut. Oh.
MarkLogic World?
Bam! Yeah, there it is. Very good. Just a huge thank you to our three panelists, bringing together three very different perspectives of the cloud. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Fabulous.